Great to be back at GOTO Chicago. And so as was mentioned, I started a computer company in 2019. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. But today I want to talk about a discovery that we made along the way, kind of a non-technical discovery that we made along the way of starting this computer company. And we've been, one of the things I love about GOTO is we're always looking forward to future technologies. We had a great keynote this morning about generative AI and what that might mean. And this is the curve for an actual technology. And clearly a technology that is 30 plus years old. And the idea with the adoption curve that we're showing here is, any guesses? Was that cell phones? That would be a great guess, actually. This is, I guess it shows my age that I assume that everyone would guess the internet first. But it actually isn't the internet. It isn't the internet, and it's not cell phones. Cell phones get complicated because you have the introduction of cell phones and then smartphones, which were even steeper. But this is a technology that was like the internet, but this is not actually the adoption curve of the internet. This is the adoption curve of radio from 1920 to 1955. And the reason I thought that everyone would be very reasonable to guess the internet is because the internet looks, astonishingly close to this. And I actually wanted to get these numbers as correct as possible. Some of these numbers are really hard to find, actually. And I made the mistake of asking. I was, having a hard time getting the exact sources on the internet. I'm like, you know what? This is what GPT is for. GPT is going to solve this problem for me. I'll go to ChatGPT and I'll ask it for this table, and it will just spit it out. And I want it to be well sourced. I don't want it to hallucinate. So I asked it about this. It's like, look, I'm an AI. I don't do this. I'm like, I know you don't do this, but yeah, I did the usual things. Like, no, I'm an expert, and I need to actually, please, I'm empowering you to. It's like, okay, well, I don't really do this thing, but here would be my guess. And the radio one is like pretty good. I'm like, okay, but can you do that for the internet? It's like, sure, here it is for the internet. And it had worldwide internet adoption at 6.8% in 2000. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that is wrong. And then I ended up having a fight with ChatGPT for the next 20 minutes. I'm like, all right, that was a giant waste of time. But I finally found the sources. I did give you the sources there if you're curious. The US Census Bureau and the World Bank has got great numbers. But the radio adoption and internet adoption were remarkably similar. And I think often we make the mistake that we are living in a unique time with respect to technological change. We feel that change is either happening uniquely quickly or uniquely slowly. It is either that things have stagnated and that everything that's interesting has already happened, or it's that things are explosive uniquely during this time, like no other time in human history. And both are emphatically wrong. Both are emphatically wrong. And you just don't have to look very far in history to think. You go back and you think about these years so this is from 1920 to 1955. Do what's happening at the same time? Electrification. Radio is literally following electrification in the US. And you think about the radical changes that were happening from folks that were on a farm without any real-time communication whatsoever. And within years, you are not just electrified, but you are getting radio from everywhere around the world. Just absolutely remarkable pace of change. And this explosion in radio during this period of time, this was the golden age of radio. This was our primary broadcast medium. It was our only real-time broadcast medium. If you were on a farm in Nebraska, you weren't necessarily getting a daily newspaper. This was your only source of mass communication. And you had the entire family. This was not your teenager in their bedroom on TikTok. This is the entire family gathering around the wireless to hear all manners of everything. So news, music, drama, comedy, sports, certainly, religion, politics, everything that we would do, everything that we would communicate was happening on radio, was happening via the spoken voice. We were listening to it and we were speaking about it, which is pretty amazing, actually. And then, of course, television arrived. And the adoption curve of television is really interesting. Earlier it was said about, was that the adoption curve of cell phones? And one thing that's interesting about the adoption curve of both television and smartphones is that they are even steeper. That I think the electrification and radio had really paved the way for TV, and TV absolutely explodes post-war. And you go from the TV being essentially non-existent to being ubiquitous in an extremely short period of time, on the order of a decade. And those scheduled programs, the dramas and so on, the comedies, the variety shows, broadly moved to television. That's what the television became the vector for that. But what was really interesting is that radio didn't actually die. It changed a lot. And there were certain vectors that were really appropriate for radio. They backed away from this kind of scheduled content, and you had these large unscheduled blocks of music, right? We listened to music on the radio. Certainly sports. Starting in the 1980s, which is in my childhood, talk radio. Talk radio, which is something sometimes you don't realize the stuff that didn't really predate you. I kind of assumed that talk radio was around, I don't know, in the 60s or 70s. But it was around, but only in very isolated pockets. Nationwide talk radio really happened in the 80s. And this stuff is super personal for me because these were the voices that I grew up on. So, I mean, if you were a sports fan at all, wherever you grew up, you probably know who your radio announcers were for baseball or football. For me, Bob Martin and Larry Zimmer. I'm a Broncos fan. I grew up in Denver. I mean, that is absolutely mother's milk for me. Bruce Williams was on something called TalkNet, giving out advice. And I would fall asleep listening to Bruce Williams give advice to people. And it's one of these things, it's was this really child appropriate for me to be listening to? I don't really know the answer to that. Because you had people that were calling up with really adult problems. And Bruce Williams was offering really level-headed advice. I remember vividly telling my mom, I couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old, that, Mom, I know what I'm going to do if I suddenly lose my job. She's like, what are you talking about? So no, what I'm going to do is get a job at a convenience store because they're always hiring. You can work a night shift and then you can interview during the day. She was like, what are you doing at night exactly? Where's this coming from? Well, this is advice from Bruce Williams. And then that's damn good advice, I gotta say. That's damn good advice. If you lose your job tomorrow, you can get a job at a convenience store where you kind of get things figured out. Tom and Ray Malgiosi, of course, the Car Talk, Click and Clack, the Tappet Brothers. And these were all in radio vectors, which were finding the right fit for radio. But one thing that's interesting is why did radio not perish? Why did these guys even exist? Obviously, radio has changed a lot since then. My kids certainly don't necessarily have these associations, but radio did not perish. And there's a really good reason for that. Radio continued to endure because audio has really unique power. Audio allows us to truly divide our attention. And this is very unique, honestly, to audio. The fact that you can do something and listen to something else. You can't do this with video. You cannot watch two videos at once, despite my teenagers' best efforts. We have the rule, as I'm sure you do in the house, that you can't double screen, and now we can't triple screen in our house, where the kids are trying to watch three. You can't watch three things at once. You can't watch three things at once. You definitely cannot listen to two things at once. And there's actually biological reasons you can't. I don't know if you've ever had that happen, especially with earbuds. It's easy to be on a call and have someone in a room not realize you're on a call and try to talk to you. And that's just total signal interference, right? You cannot sort that out at all. But what you can do is you can listen and do something else. And in fact, if you're listening to audio that does not demand your attention, which is to say background music, it can actually help you focus on cognitively intense tasks. Now, I wanted to be able to go to neuroscience, preparation for this talk, and get something authoritative to tell you. As it turns out, neuroscience kind of has its head up its ass on this particular topic. And I read not just one, but several neuroscientists are saying that actually, no, that's not the case. And the way to focus on a cognitive task is to actually be in absolute silence. And I'm like, nope, you're wrong. Sorry, we're not going to defer. I don't care what size study you ran because I know you're wrong. So how many folks are software engineers in general? How many people write code to music? And how many people will actually know that they write code better to music. You're not doing it because you write code worse, right? And how many actually vary what you listen to depending on what you're doing? You might do it more implicitly, a lot of hands. And because there's no times like the one thing you should definitely not do is listen to hip hop. And I'm like, I cannot tell you the number of decks that I have done to Tribe Called Quest and Jurassic 5. Like, how dare you, sir? Take that away. But what I find, the music that I listen to, I change it up depending on what I'm doing. And there's so many times when I want it to be absolute silence, but often I find that music helps me focus on a cognitively intense task. And I think that that's true for a lot of, I'm going to go ahead and speak on behalf of software engineers to neuroscientists. Get your head out of your ass and study this one properly because we all actually know the truth. So let's get the data supporting the truth, please. So that's kind of an interesting thing about background music. And I should say the data here is actually mixed. There's actually plenty of data supporting what we know to be the case. And it honestly has not been studied that comprehensively because it's difficult to study. And it also varies person to person, by the way. You definitely have, like, my sister and I both went to the same undergraduate institution, and there were different places to study. And she's 4 years younger than I am. I never realized until she actually attended there that she's one of the absolutely quiet people. So she needs to be an absquai. I'm like, we can't even be friends if you're an absquai. I'm sorry. Like, I'm a study with my headphones on kind of person. That's interesting. The thing that's actually more interesting for our purposes here is that listening to audio that does demand your attention can actually allow you to focus better and maintain your energy better and alertness better on a repetitive task while you retain the audio. So I drive a lot, and we ski. We live in California. It's a 3-hour drive skiing. We like the day trip. It's a lot of driving. I learned pretty early on that a great risk to me was falling asleep at the wheel after a very long day. And the way to keep me alive is to make sure that I was listening to a podcast that was keeping my brain engaged. And so if you're driving a long distance, you go out of your mind in absolute silence. And if you're driving a long distance, right? But it's also it's housework, it's walking the dog, what have you. We can actually focus better on that audio. I bet for you there are things that you've heard, conversations that you've had, where you remember where you were when you had the conversation, you heard that podcast. Certainly for me, I like to backpack. Boy, if you backpack, you're on the trail for a long time, there are a lot of conversations that happen on the trail, and I know exactly, someone will tell me a story, I'm like, you told me this story, I remember exactly where you were when you last told me this story. We were in the High Sierra together. I know exactly the lake that we were at, because you're able to lock it in. There's something about walking and talking that is very core to who we are as humans, and our ability to talk and to listen as we do these other tasks, as we cook, as we eat, as we walk. And this is really, really important, and it explains a lot of why audio persisted, why radio persisted. So I think actually confusing to a lot of folks is why NPR surged in popularity. NPR was only started in 1970. Every other broadcasting network was started in the radio era, in the golden age of radio. So NBC, CBS, ABC, all started in the golden age of radio. The only network that postdates all of that is actually the radio network. National Public Radio starts in 1970, and it became the way that many people got their news. And I was at a talk with someone who's in broadcast television saying, nobody knows why this is. It's like, really? Do you not, are you never in a car? It's like people are listening to NPR because they are in their car. You can't watch MSNBC when you're in your car, but you can listen to the radio. So there's a real resurgence of the radio. And in this resurgence, we saw a great renaissance in terms of audio storytelling. And I am going to go ahead and attribute this to Ira Glass and This American Life, in part because I remember vividly, I was a young adult in 1996, and I remember the first time that I heard This American Life. It was like 11 p.m. and I happened to be driving between 2 points. And it's just like, what is this? This is totally different than anything else that was on radio. And this is almost amazing to say, because I think This American Life was so influential. It has changed it has brought audio storytelling back in such a profound way that it's hard to imagine that it was ever absent. But it definitely was. It definitely was. And the first moment that I had of being in the car in my driveway with the ignition off, listening to the radio, was emphatically This American Life. So this renaissance was really, really important because capturing people's stories is something that we had lost. And I'm not talking about fictional stories. I'm talking about people's actual lived stories. This is something that we are very predisposed to. We are predisposed to listening to stories. We are predisposed to telling stories. And I think to a certain degree, and I think in part because of This American Life and the success of This American Life, the idea of like storytellers kind of came into vogue. And all of a sudden, everybody in marketing is like, no, I'm not the VP of marketing. I am the chief storyteller. It's like, oh, come on. And there was actually a great podcast that I'll link to later where she was actually going into a decoder ring and she was going into storytelling, trying to understand the storytelling. And she was talking to, I hate to call him out, but the chief storyteller of Microsoft. She's like, all right, chief storyteller of Microsoft, like tell me like one of your great stories. Give me your best story. She's like, all right, my best story, we enabled Wi-Fi in Kenya. And it was so meaningful to the people. And that's a great thing to do. I don't take anything away from that. But she's like, I need a story. That's just something that happened. That's just recounting something. And by the way, it's recounting something that's like kind of like an unvarnished good for Microsoft. It's a little, it's a little too pat. But that's not a story. Like that's boring, even if it's important. And you may be like, oh God, I wish I cared more about that. Well, the reason you don't care about that is because it wasn't given to you as a story. What would be a story is like, let me tell you about the time we damn near did not get Wi-Fi in Kenya working. And let me tell you about the story of being on the ground in Kenya. I've got 24 hours until this launch. I've got Steve Ballmer at the time breathing down my neck. And I've got 2 different telcos that can't talk to one another and had to get Wi-Fi working in Kenya. Now you're like, okay, tell me more. I made all that up, by the way. So that's a story. That's a story. Because a story has to arouse our empathy. Your mirror neurons have to fire. Unless you're Larry Ellison, in which case you have no mirror neurons, so just don't bother. Give up on that. But for the rest of us, for those of us that do have empathy, those mirror neurons fire. Our curiosity is engaged. What happens next? And by the way, we love to talk about like the curiosity of kids. At least my kids, like scientific curiosity kind of comes and goes. Like some kids are scientifically curious. Lots of other kids are not scientifically curious. However, all kids that I've encountered are pretty curious when it comes to story. And this was hit home to me. We had a friend of ours over and he was describing a story about a friend of his who'd just gotten out of jail and tries to tell the rest of the story. And my kids are like, wait, stop. Jail? Like, what happened? It's like, it's not important. And you're like, no, you should not have brought that up, man. Like, if it's not important, you should not have mentioned it because now, like, that's a story. There's a story there. There's an interesting story there, and that arouses our curiosity. What happened? Tell me more. I want to know more. That we care what happens next. Why are we so wired that way? Why do you immediately lunge? Why do you care what happens next? Because that's how we did it as pre-literate societies. I mean, you look at what we did, we humanity, pre-literacy. We conquered the planet, tip to tail, side to side. We were in very hostile environments with really extraordinary technology being passed down from generation to generation to generation without writing, without YouTube, without a TikTok video showing you how. And we did it because we spoke and we listened. So this is really deep in our humanity, and I think it is extremely important for technologists. I think stories are especially important for technologists. So radio is great, obviously, but there's a reason that my kids today don't think of like radio announcers as like, those voices don't have the same resonance because radio ultimately has ceded to other ways of getting this audio content. And in particular, yes, you could there was internet radio in the late 90s, but it was very proprietary. It was really only on the desktop. it really took us to get to MP3 players. And the iPod was not the first MP3 player. There have been a couple of others before then, but the iPod was the one that really took the world by storm, if this predates you. And so that's where podcasting, it occurs to me people might not know that podcasting comes from the iPod. The iPod was the thing. But so this is where podcasting was born. The idea of taking audio, a slightly longer form, and allowing people to carry with them portably. Importantly, the podcasts themselves were syndicated via RSS feeds. So you could get to these podcasts. And I think, podcasting started in 2004. And I was trying to when did podcasts really take off for me personally? It was later than that. I was listening to my favorite, I was relieved that some of these great radio programs like This American Life, like Radio Lab, I can now get those as a podcast. That was great. But podcasts, I wouldn't say they languished, but I think they were niche for a while. But then a couple of things that served to accelerate them. First of all, we had the smartphone. Right? We're talking about the phone adoption. Starting in 2007, you no longer needed a dedicated MP3 player. And so now, all of a sudden, the same device that I've got, I can use that to play audio. I think it kind of kills me to say this because, look, I'm sorry that I made fun of AirPods when they came out, okay? I'll be the first to apologize. I thought they looked goofy. I've now joined Team Goofy. They no longer look goofy. Thank you, early adopters, for being willing to look so goofy for the rest of us. You have normalized it for the people that are afraid of looking goofy like me, so thank you very much. And now it's like having sticks coming out of your ears, that's totally normal. I also think from a podcast perspective, it's actually a really important accelerant. Because, maybe I just do a little too much housework, but speaking universally, it's really hard to do dishes with wired headphones. It's a lot easier with earbuds. So really hard, jogging, a lot of things that we may want to do that we can do while we listen are now way, way easier with these sticks coming out of our ears. So the Bluetooth was I think, huge for this, to open up the number of tasks. And then I think that we saw this with Sarah Koenig, the This American Life alumna, who showed what an ultra-long form podcast could look like. I think Serial was the one that probably broke through. It was probably one of the first podcasts to really break through into the mainstream and show us what this long-form narrative could be and have folks that are binge listening to a podcast. I think that Serial was among the early ones that we were binge listening to. So all of these things kind of added up, and now podcasting becomes very much in vogue. 2014, 2015, 2016, and so on. And so I mentioned we started a computer company in 2019. I wouldn't say we started a company for the podcast. That's an exaggeration. But definitely when we were starting the company, it's we definitely also want to start a podcast. We knew we wanted to do a podcast. We knew we were going to raise a bunch of money. And we knew it was going to take us some time to raise some money. So hey, while we're doing that, let's actually get on these podcasting microphones and let's have the podcast that we always wish we had, namely getting stories from engineers. So we got some terrific folks to come join us in the garage, and we got them talking about their stories. And there are a bunch to go check out here. This is On the Metal. On the Metal episode number 1 is Jeff Rothschild. Jeff Rothschild was a founder of Veritas. I guess some people claim to be the first adult at Facebook, but he's truly the first adult at Facebook. And this is someone who is loaded with stories. It was extraordinary conversation with Jeff. And to the point that we felt like we were taking up a little bit too much of his time. And afterwards, he was like, I'm so appreciative of this because I've actually never talked about any of that. And I'm so grateful that my kids get to actually listen to some of this stuff. And so it's oh my God, I thought, okay, I wasn't quite ready for the weight of recording history here. But these conversations were amazing. And they were in-depth, effectively oral histories from these technologists. And actually, many engineers who currently work at Oxide learned about Oxide because they listened to On the Metal. And when we did the podcast, part of the reason we did it is I want to have the podcast we'd always listen to. I also knew that the kind of person who would love these conversations is the kind of person that we would love to work with. And the thesis was, if we throw this thing out there, someone that we've never met before, who's not in any of our social networks, is going to materialize in front of us saying, I absolutely have to work with you. That happened within 6 hours of launching the podcast. I got hit up by LinkedIn from someone who had worked for Facebook and is like, I just listened to Jeff Rothschild. I need to talk with you. And that's Arian, who's been one of our founding engineers and has been terrific for the company. So we did that. And when we were talking about this talk with the company, a surprising number of engineers, like, actually, by the way, like, I listened to an On the Metal episode too. That's why I'm here too. So we got a lot of engineers through On the Metal. That wasn't necessarily, that was a terrific side effect of these amazing conversations. And so we were recording a second season and we were kind of halfway through that. And then the pandemic happened. Right? And the pandemic and then the lockdown in 2020, On the Metal very much went on hiatus. We had been recording On the Metal in person. And even though we were becoming an all remote company, we were born kind of hybrid local remote and founded again in 2019. March 2020, we're now obviously all remote. But it just didn't feel right to go back to On the Metal. We really wanted to go back in person. And then, of course, lockdown was taking a long time and we were getting through it. So that was extending longer. And also, we were building the product. So, we were also just busy, frankly, and ultimately did not get back to On the Metal. And so the pandemic kind of took that away. But as with so many things, the pandemic has taken a lot away. It's also given us a lot in that it has forced us to change things up in some ways that are really productive and delightful. And one of the things that it gave us is social audio as effectively a new medium. So social audio, for those who are unaware, social audio is using a social network to have a real-time conversation. And this was an outlet that we desperately needed, as proved by Clubhouse. Right? Clubhouse was kind of the canonical social audio app. Clubhouse explodes in early 2020, mid-2020. Clubhouse gave people a vector to discuss some really important stuff because we had the pandemic going on. We had George Floyd going on immediately after the pandemic started, really, in hindsight. And there was just a lot that people wanted to talk about. And Clubhouse gave that vector. And it was all of a sudden, it was clear that social audio was going to be really important. Clubhouse fumbled very, very, very badly. I look forward to reading the business school study on the fumbling at Clubhouse. I'm an Android user, so the fact that they're iPhone only, that might not bother you, it bothers me. It's like, what's the problem with Android? And literally prioritizing the most meaningless features over Android use. It's like, we want to allow creators to monetize with, with cryptocurrency. It's like, can we just support my device? I just want to listen. It's like, no, not you. You're a subhuman. I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. And it's like, it's a Clubhouse. It's a Clubhouse. Of course, I'm not invited. Right, I got it. Well, enjoy, iPhone users. Enjoy the Clubhouse. So yeah, maybe there's a little bit of Schadenfreude in here. But they were focusing on monetization rather than value. Please those who, you do not attract creators by offering monetization, not the good ones anyway. Attract creators, get people creating on your platform, rock it for a while, and then figure out how to monetize. Definitely don't do monetization before doing your Android support. And just in general, Clubhouse, the thesis of Clubhouse is people want to talk to celebrities. People want to listen to celebrities. I think it's true to a degree, sure, but that's actually not what made Clubhouse explode. What made Clubhouse explode is that people wanted to talk to one another. That's who people wanted to talk to. They wanted to hear from other voices. So, and then of course they were overrun with crypto bros, which was also its demise. So the Clubhouse is not looking promising, but in 2021, Twitter announces Twitter Spaces. And Twitter Spaces is a much better fit for us at Oxide. We had missed audio, we look forward to getting back to audio, and Twitter Spaces seemed like a great experience. So fortunately, I didn't want to die alone, so I convinced my colleague out of Leventhal to join me, and we had our first Twitter Space just about a little over 2 years ago. May 3rd, 2021. And it was immediately compelling. You could see that the quality of conversations was going to be so good. One of our big problems is these aren't recorded. And there was no way to record them. God bless Adam, who figured out this ridiculous Rube Goldberg-esque machine to be able, which involved running an Android emulator on a burner device and a bunch of other things. But he was able to actually get this contraption to record Twitter Spaces, which was really, really important to us because the conversations were so good. You don't want to just throw them out. They're amazing, amazing stuff. So we took this as, we called it Oxide and Friends, and made the recordings available via both YouTube and then really importantly RSS as a podcast. Twitter Spaces, we like a lot about Twitter Spaces. I'm trying to find the nicest things I can say about Twitter Spaces. Twitter Spaces is also super, super frustrating. And if you use Twitter Spaces a bunch, you already know this. Just absolutely maddening. Tons of bugs, shortcomings. I mean, in many ways, the biggest shortcomings of Twitter Spaces, you could not use it from the desktop, and there is nothing that would indicate that you can't use it from the desktop. So you would have someone who reasonably is like, I'm like unmuting myself, like, why isn't it working? It's, because Twitter Spaces is like gaslighting you. Just because it's like, can you give an error message, maybe? Can you just say, like, use it on a phone? Yeah, at least they had Android support. I guess that shouldn't be. But tons of bugs, and they weren't necessarily going in the right direction because how much do you hate this? Twitter Spaces is like, Clubhouse is monetizing creators, so we must monetize creators. It's like, no, Clubhouse is doing the wrong stupid thing. You don't need to follow them doing the wrong stupid thing. You can actually do the smart thing, please. We had lots of things we wanted them to do, but they weren't headed in that direction. It was kind of listing, and then of course it was owned, but now owned by someone who doesn't know how to run the business, and very clearly going to fly into the side of the mountain. Not interested in Twitter Spaces. We did some experimentation with a bunch of different things, and settled on Discord. And Discord actually is really interesting, and I would actually encourage you to listen to the How I Built This with Guy Raz, talking to Jason Tron on Discord and kind of the history of Discord. And because Discord is actually true grassroots social audio, and then it's trying to take a bunch of peers and connect them via audio. Now, in this case, the peers are trying to storm the castle or kill the dragon or what have you. The peers are trying to collaborate on video games. And Discord had to be dragged more or less kicking and screaming away from video games. Not that video games are great, but it's like, hey, Discord, a bunch of other people want to use this, not to just storm the castle or kill the dragon, that too, but we want to do it for these other things. We want to do it to have a community, have a discussion. Discord added their Discord Stages feature, which is really key for us because it allows us to moderate kind of who comes up on stage. And so that allows for us to have new voices, which is really, really important to us. One thing that this kind of the celebrity infatuation loses is that so much of our great contributions have come from people I've never met before who come up on stage to contribute to a conversation with their personal story. We did an Oxide and Friends on layoffs, which at a time when people still are very anxious about layoffs, we had a guy come up on stage who is an immigrant and just gotten his green card and was saying, fortunately, I'm at Google. No one is talking about layoffs at Google, before there were layoffs at Google, but talking about the anxiety of being an immigrant and being on a visa and having these layoffs going. And like, such an important thing for every single one of us to hear. If that is your experience, you are already living it every single day. If it's not your experience, you need to listen to this because not everybody in your company has the same level of anxiety about layoffs. Some of you have to leave the country if they're laid off. And the level of anxiety that people have over that is off the charts. But boy, does it help to hear someone in their own voice speak to that anxiety. And totally admire. Thank you, Horace, wherever you are, the guts to come up on stage and talk about that. Really, really compelling. And not someone who is a longtime listener, first-time caller. So really is made for really compelling conversations, which has been great. Also, having concurrent text chat, which we did not have in Twitter Spaces. One of our number one asks for Twitter Spaces is, can you give us a chat, please? Where people can say, like, oh, what they just talked about, here's the link. Having text chat, just like we can do two things at once, having text chat and audio, they're a really good pairing for one another because when you're saying something, I can offer the links to it. I can explain the backstory, what have you. I can answer the questions. I don't know what they're talking about. Okay, well, here's what they're talking about. You can do that in parallel without interrupting the audio, which is actually really, really important. So Oxide and Friends has been huge. It's been exactly that. It's been us hanging out with our friends, talking about things that are interesting to us and interesting to what we're building. And what we're building is super aggressive, super technically aggressive. We're building a rack scale machine, a machine about this big. We're doing our own compute boards. We're doing our own networking switch. We're doing all of our own firmware, all of our own software. We're doing distributed systems. We're doing operating systems. We're doing firmware. We're doing hardware. We're doing the work. So we've got a lot going on and a lot that we wanted to talk about, a lot of topics that are important to us. But it also allowed for lots of storytelling, lots of rants on the various topics of the day. We had, I still think, we did a couple weeks ago, we did an Oxide and Friends on GPT. Adam was like, why are we doing this? I'm like, no, I think this is like the time is right to have a conversation about GPT. I feel we had one of the best conversations about GPT that I've ever been a part of because it had dialed the fear way down. GPT conversations become insufferable when the fear is coming off the charts. So it was a really good conversation. Definitely one to check out. And then I should say that like I can't omit the corrections to pronunciation. I had no idea how many words I was pronouncing incorrectly, apparently. I'm not going to say the way I used to pronounce it because my brain still struggles with it, but let's just say I was not pronouncing conflagration correctly. I was mispronouncing it with a confidence that would make GPT-4 blush. So that's been corrected. Conflagration is the correct way to pronounce it, not the way I was pronouncing it. But this is like what engineers talk about, right? This is all of this kind of stuff is what engineers talk about. And the thing that struck me as we got this out there, and we've been doing this now for, we've got 70 plus episodes out there. The number of very young engineers, very young, younger than 25 engineers coming up to me saying, hey, God, I love Oxide and Friends. Listen to, okay, what's going on? And then I kind of realized belatedly and embarrassingly what's going on. Like, why are younger engineers so gravitating to me just like horsing around with Adam and a bunch of these other folks? Because they are hearing that engineering wisdom. You got a bunch of seasoned engineers expanding their circle to include those younger engineers. Hey, come join us at lunch. Come join us at dinner. And we're going to shoot the shit, chew the fat. And when we do that, we're going to navigate through all sorts of interesting stories, interesting life experiences, and you as a younger engineer are going to absorb that wisdom. And I feel embarrassed how long it took me to kind of put this together because when I was a younger engineer, this was so important to me. So this is me. You think I look young now. This is me. It's me in 1996. I'm 22, not 12 in this picture. But this is me in the foreground. We are at a restaurant that we used to go to every Monday night, 5 o'clock. This is Jeff Bonwick, who's the inventor of ZFS. I was at Sun Microsystems. I came out to work with Jeff. This is Roger Faulkner. Roger is since deceased. Roger invented /proc. So if you've ever used /proc, Roger was AT&T Bell Labs, invented /proc with long goals. And other like fellow engineers. This is actually my roommate. I've got no idea why he was out with us at this particular dinner. And this is the parents of another colleague of ours. So this is kind of a special occasion. I guess that's why we have the photo. But these dinners were extraordinary for me. They were so important. And here's a photo taken a decade later. I was wondering, it's like, am I even in this photo? I don't even know. It was sent to me by Stephen Hahn, who was also in that previous photo. And then I looked at the date stamp, and I realized, like, oh, and now I see why Stephen took the photo. Because every year, we used to make predictions. We used to write down our predictions. And this is us making predictions for the year 2006. And because I actually have the predictions written down, and I know the order around the table, I can tell you emphatically that is my wrist. So I would like to report that my wrist is here. I am here. This is Adam Leventhal. This is why Adam is kind of looking pensive, like, what good prediction am I going to make? Predictions tell you more about the present than the future. You need to be told this. This is the one thing that I really learned. Most of our predictions were very, very bad. I did make a 3-year prediction in 2003 that Apple was going to introduce a new must-have gadget, a combination cell phone and MP3 player that they were going to call the iPhone. Literally made that prediction in 2003, and then in the same breath said it was going to be a flop. So it just goes to show you that even when we were right, we were also wrong. So the predictions were often wrong. But one thing, this is Bill Moore here. Bill has worked at a bunch of different companies, was at Sun, was at DSSD. Bill, in this dinner, actually did make a prediction that actually did prove to be correct. Bill said that we are not going to see a CPU above 5 gigahertz. This is the end of Dennard scaling. The end of Dennard scaling actually happens in 2006. So Bill rightfully was calling the top on Dennard scaling. Bill, good going. The rest of us, not so good. But these predictions, I learned so much from these predictions. It was so much fun to be a part of. And of course, we now do the predictions on Oxide and Friends. And you can go to the Oxide and Friends, we've done predictions and kind of checked up on ourselves. So the social audio, this power of social audio, it is the power of the hallway track. It is the power, the thing that draws us to conferences is our ability to talk to one another outside of these talks, right? And if you've been in like great hallway track, you've got that circle of like 20 people, or you may have like 2 people maybe with divergent perspectives, 2 kind of people maybe you've looked up to who are now having this like intense conversation. I mean, it's just like, okay, this is what I'm here for, right? This is the hallway track. We can now do that. We can do that in a way that it's accessible to other folks. It's recorded. Now everybody gets to be a part of that hallway track. Everybody gets to hear this extraordinary conversation. For us, it has allowed the team to speak in its own voice. This is something that's really important to me. And part of the reason, one thing I didn't like about On the Metal is it was only us talking to one person at a time. I really wanted to talk to an entire team. I wanted to get our entire team talking about some of the things we've done. And so we have done episodes on things that have, to the best of my knowledge, never been talked about, period. So things like bring up. Bring up is the act of taking a new piece of hardware and turning it into hardware that is also running software. Horrific things happen in bring up. Things that no one ever wants to talk about. No one wants to talk about everything that went wrong in bring up. So people never do. And it is literally lost to history. One of the things that I knew about bring up from Sun, famously, no flash photography in the Bring Up Lab. Why? Because at campus, Sun 4C, they had the new CPU there. Everyone is gathered around the new CPU because they bring up successfully. Flash goes off. Thing glows white hot as the photons have excited all these electrons into the conduction band. The thing has become a gigantic conductor and end of CPU. No flash photography in the Bring Up Lab. That's a story that is not that's a story that was told to me at Osteria in Palo Alto. But that's a story that should be on the record, right? We should be talking about that stuff. So when we talked about Bring Up, I wanted to have us talk about Bring Up, warts and all. And this is an amazing story in Bring Up. So we did Tales in the Bring Up Lab, more Tales in the Bring Up Lab, and I think even more Tales in the Bring Up Lab, where we've talked about bringing up, and it's amazing. Compliance, this is the FCC compliance, making sure that you don't create an accidental radio from your computer. Compliance is another thing. Nobody ever talks about compliance. Maybe Bring Up you can whisper words about, but what happens in compliance you really don't talk about because compliance comes out with a yep, nope. Nobody wants to say by the skin of our absolute teeth are we compliant. Our episode in compliance goes through all of them. And again, something I would love to be wrong on this because if any other engineering team is talking about it, I want to go listen to it because it is amazing listening, amazing stories. The supply chain, Kate Hicks, who runs our operations, talking about all the things that she and her team did to manage our supply chain, very complicated supply chain, things that people are not talking about enough. Debugging system software, distributed systems, a bunch of Rust, a whole lot of Rust. Some of these things no team has ever gone on the record for. I think it is extremely important for younger engineers to see that these domains exist, that people are actually working in these domains. When I was an engineer graduating from school in the mid-90s, I wanted to go do OS kernel development. I was told nobody does that anymore. You should not go do OS kernel development. It was grievous malpractice. That was an adult who was trying to act in my best interest. It was an adult who was trying to say, I don't know who does this, would have been the thing to say. But discouraging me to go into OS kernel development, thank God I did not listen to him. And thank God I said, screw you, I want to go do this anyway. Because that has been my career, and it's been a great career. I don't regret it for a heartbeat, but it is important that my younger self hear that, no, people are doing this. Sorry, the adult that just told you that, yeah, they're just wrong, as it turns out. Adults are wrong, pretty frequently. But you can actually come hear it from the team, hear what we're doing. Join us if that's something that you're interested in doing. Social audio is important because it is a new vector for this engineering wisdom, especially in this remote world. And you've got younger engineers. How do you bring up younger engineers? How do you get them around the lunch table when we're not in the same city? And what you can't do is like, well, let's order everyone back to work and let's order people to move across the country. It's like, no, stop, Zuck. No, we're not doing that. What we actually need to go do is tack into some of the great advantages and strengths we have in this new world. What can we now go do that we couldn't go do before? If you're not, for example, you should record every meeting. You record every single meeting at Oxide, and that has been an absolute watershed for our company culture. Really recommend you record every meeting. We couldn't do that before. Part of the reason we would never go back to the office, at least everyone coming back to a single office, I can't live without meetings being recorded. Because it allows people to catch up on stuff they missed, allows people to know that they don't need to be in a meeting. Really important. To be effective, social audio needs to be recorded. It needs to be open, and it needs to be recorded. Please don't just have these conversations, record them, and syndicate it. But obviously, encourage you to check out Oxide and Friends. Check out the back catalog. You can do it while walking or driving or anything else. There's a lot of great stuff on there. I'd love for you to join us live as well. But honestly, that back catalog, there's so much there in that back catalog. We did an On the Metal episode to point to Oxide and Friends. This is somewhat recently. And I was looking for an episode that I didn't like, a conversation that I didn't like in Oxide and Friends. Honestly, couldn't find one. And that's not because of me. That's because of the power of having people talk to one another. Really amazing stuff. And I would really encourage your engineering team to do this. There are things that are happening on your engineering team that people should know more broadly. If you have an outage, you're writing a postmortem about it, why don't have the team talk about what that outage was like? We're gonna talk about Wednesday. It's like we've already written out, everyone knows we were down on Wednesday. We wrote a blog post explaining what happened on Wednesday. It's like you got, at this point, nothing to lose and a lot to gain by getting the team together and talk about that moment of terror, what happened when the pager went off. Talk about that postmortem. People don't see inside of that. Let them see inside of your process. And you don't need to cater to everyone, I think is another important point. You don't fall into the trap of the lowest common denominator. Talk about the stuff that's interesting to you. Because if it's interesting to you, it's probably interesting to your customers. It's probably interesting to people who want to come work with you. And regardless, and who cares? And if it's not, it's interesting to you. It's interesting stuff. And the fact that it's interesting to you is going to give you a sense when you're talking about it, a confidence and an enthusiasm that itself will be contagious. And if you start your own, please let me know, because I would love to like and subscribe. Thank you very much.